Good morning. It's 11:20. You should do a little better. Good morning.
Good morning.
Had plenty of time to come alive in spite of the events of the last 24 hours, which have been devastating to those that wear the orange, which has absolutely nothing to do with the 38th chapter of Genesis. Other than to say, I told someone in the hallway, UT's defense just a few minutes ago was spotted running onto the field for the second half. If Robert was here to do a little dumb thing, he would do it at this time. Well, look, here we are. We come to the 38th chapter of Genesis today. And before I get started, it is tradition here at New Union, if you'll look to the left, my right, the Christmas tree over here that has few, if any, ornaments. And the reason for that is there's these little crystal or silver or clear balls. I need to get it right. And typically we will reserve that for you to have a name of someone you know who is not a follower of Jesus, that you're going to pray for through this Advent season. And so when you get the opportunity, if you just come up and after church or in the next few days, write that name on a piece of paper and drop it into the ornament. They come apart, and then hang it on the tree and commit to praying for that individual over the next few weeks. We would be appreciative of that, and it's our duty to do so, and so I would encourage you to do that. I told the first service 3 hours ago I became 55 years of age. That happened at 7:36 a.m. This morning, and as I think about that, it's just hard to imagine how quickly you get old. And some of you would say, well, that's not old at all, and then many of you would say that's unbelievably old. And it's all, your point of view depends on your viewpoint. But I was thinking about that this morning, and just as I was looking in the mirror, and I thought, man, I really don't look very good anymore. And there was a time that I felt like I was a relatively attractive person. Now, again, that was relative. It's all relative. And the reason I say that is I hung around with a bunch of ugly people. And if you'll do that, you'll be artificially good looking. And that's worked for me most of these years, because I ran around with Micah Ruling and Kimball Brooks and many others who shall remain nameless. But if you'll hang around with older guys that are losing their hair and have more girth than they used to, you'll still think you're attractive. And so anyway, that's just a little funny, and that's not to get you to wish me a happy birthday. That's just to really take a shot at Micah and Kimball, because I don't get this opportunity often as a lay elder at New Union. But I'm pleased to be so, and pleased to get the opportunity to dive into the Word with you. It also occurs to me, and just in fairness to Keith, that typically I will draw tough passages. And I guess there's probably not a reason for that, although there may be a reason. As a lay elder, you cannot terminate me. And so that's probably the reason that I'm getting these tough passages. And Keith has done it to me. Jeremy Deal used to do it to me. Rob Armstrong's done it to me. Danny Ruling's the only person that never did it to me. He always gave me a layup. The last Sunday of every December, I would preach. He and Martha would be celebrating their anniversary. And so, obviously, I think higher of Danny than the other three senior pastors that I've gotten to work with. And that's fair, Keith. I mean, Keith knows, man. It's like following Paul Bunyan here when you follow Danny Ruling. In any event, the 38th chapter of Genesis is one of the most raw chapters in all of the Bible. And if you've never read it, we're about to read it. And I will say to you, it's okay to be shocked by it, because there's some shocking language that little ears may or may not want to hear. I'll be very cautious, or as cautious as I can be with that. But we want to make sure that we hear what God is trying to say to us today. I would characterize the 38th chapter of Genesis as a rude but necessary interruption of the book of Genesis. We've run through 37 chapters, and really in 37, Joseph's brothers kick him in a hole, and they're trying to determine what to do with him. Are we going to kill him And then Judah, who was brother number 4, son number 4 of Jacob, says, hey guys, why would we kill the rascal? Let's sell him for profit. And that's what they do. They sell him to the Ishmaelites, and that's where 37 closes out, and he's headed to Potiphar's house, and we think, man, this story is getting really juicy, and then like a bomb, the 38th chapter of Genesis is dropped into the Bible here for us to consider today. And so we're going to read this passage together, and then we'll really get into it. Chapter 38 of Genesis, verse 1 through 30. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste himself on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up, for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside? And they said, no cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, no cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality, and Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify those, whose these are, the signet, the cord, and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore, his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. Welcome to chapter 38 of Genesis. A little embarrassing to read, embarrassing to hear, and yet so many lessons here, so many directions the passage could be taken, and so many lessons here for followers of Jesus. And so as we turn to this 38th chapter, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but the main point today is this. Keith, the elders, we decided, I guess collectively, but it was Keith's idea, that over the next 4 weeks, we would preach on the women in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. And so that's what we're going to do for the next 4 weeks, and I drew Tamar. Let's move to Matthew. Flip with me there. The first chapter of Matthew. This is an important thing for us to note as we begin our discussion. Well, it's really, by definition, not a discussion, because you're not talking to me, I'm just talking to you. Matthew 1. First verse, Matthew 1:1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And that is the first place that we see a female name in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Right there. Tamar in verse 3 of chapter 1 of Matthew. And Judah's name's also mentioned. And having read the 38th chapter with me just a moment ago, it's fair to think, how in the world did people who have behaved in this way become a part of the genealogy of Christ? And that's what we're going to discuss over these next few moments. This is a sordid lot in the 38th chapter. Tons of mistakes made, and there's some dilemmas here that Tamar is going to have to address. So the first thing we want to look at today are Judah's sons and the dilemma of Tamar, because you can't really talk about Tamar without talking about Judah. Judah, one of Jacob's sons, we find in verse 1, look there. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside. Those two words, I think, are critical because we've just kicked Joseph in a hole in the 37th chapter. And Judah was the mastermind of selling him into slavery. He ends up in Potiphar's house. And that's important to note because Judah goes to the Canaanites. Now keep in mind, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the beginning of the lineage leading to Jesus Christ, have been very passionate about saying, watch who you hang out with. Watch who you hang out with. And yet Judah, as soon as Joseph is off into slavery, decides that he's going to turn aside and goes to a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Why did Judah leave his family? There's probably a multitude of reasons. I would submit to you, Judah's probably very embarrassed that he has sold his brother into slavery and he's lied to his own father about it, leading him to believe Joseph is dead. That's probably number one. Number two is probably he thought, man, I'm going to go down and hang out with the Canaanites and have a big time. I got to get away from all this pressure. This is just too much for me. And so he goes and hangs out with the Canaanites. And as you know, you have a tendency, we humanoids have a tendency to become like the people we hang out with. And so, particularly those of you who've raised children or are raising children or going to raise children in the future, one of the things you tell them is choose your friends wisely. Choose them wisely. particularly if the friend is of the opposite sex. Choose them wisely. Make sure you honor God in your relationship, and make sure the person you're courting is worthy of courting. And if they're not, flee. Well, Judah does not take that advice. He heads on down, and he's hanging out with the Canaanites. And in verse 2, he sees this daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. That was the father, not the daughter. And he takes her, and they conceive, and they have 3 boys, Er, Onan, Shelah. And so Judah is already setting a bad example for the boys, and they just kind of do what their daddy's been doing. There's no brain surgery involved here. And so as we run up to verse 6, we see Judah takes a wife for Er, his firstborn. Now that was the custom of the day. Now I wish it was still the custom, frankly. I think Rachel and I would love to handpick our daughter-in-law. Wouldn't you all? Don't answer that, because if you've got a daughter-in-law, she's sitting close to you, she might read something in there. Or son-in-law, that works both ways. I'm not being hypocritical here. But that's not the way it works today. It's not the culture we live in, but it was the culture at that time. And so Judah takes this son Er and finds him a wife, and her name is Tamar. And what we find here is that he was a wicked guy. Er was. We don't know what he did. It doesn't say specifically, but we know it was bad enough that God kills him. So suffice it to say, he's a bad guy. And so Judah then says to his middle son, Onan, number 2, he says to him, you must fulfill your role as a brother-in-law and have children with Tamar so the family line of your brother can continue. Now that's a little different for us, isn't it? It's a lot different for us. But this was this concept of levirate marriage. You can read about it in Deuteronomy 25, and basically levirate marriage says if the man passes and he leaves a widow and they didn't have a son, then his brother has to come along and provide the son, but the son won't be his, it'll be the deceased brother's son, and it will be part of his lineage. So what's Onan say to that? Let's move along. Onan is more than happy to roll through the hay. That's the best term I could come up with, Colonel. Colonel will appreciate that term. He was more than happy to roll through the hay with Tamar, but he would not allow himself to impregnate her. Now you can read between the lines, because he knows a couple of things. He knows if he impregnates Tamar, the son will not be his, number 1. And number 2, he knows if he delivers a son to Tamar, he no longer gets 2/3 of the estate. See, now that Er's gone, that third's going to Onan. Onan's third is going to Onan, so he's at 2/3. The third is going to go to Shelah. So from a standpoint of selfishness and greed, he thinks, nah, I'm not doing that. Now, I'll happily participate, but I'm not going to give her a son. And so what happens? God kills Onan because he did not fulfill his duty to his deceased brother and wife. So Judah's boys, if you're keeping score, they're 0 for 2. They're 0 for 2. And they are not doing very well. And so Tamar is left destitute, which is what happened in this culture. If a woman was unmarried and did not have children and then was sent back to her father, she's going to be destitute. There's nobody to take care of her. It's very likely, statistically, she's going to outlive her parents. Who's left to take care of Tamar? And it's a culture that Tamar can't just pick herself up by her bootstraps. She couldn't go get a student loan and go to law school and change her life. Like that was not a thing at this point in time. And it's hard for us to put ourselves in that situation, but that's exactly where we are. Let's move on to Tamar's trickery. Tamar is an unrighteous individual. I don't want you to leave here and think, man, LeBron thinks that Tamar's golden. She's not golden. She is an unrighteous individual. However, I am sympathetic to the fact that her back is against the wall. Her back's against the wall. One of the things that drives me crazy, everybody has a pet peeve, don't they? One of the things that drives me crazy, just as Joe Christian, is that we look at other people's situation and think we know how to fix it. And we really don't. But what we should be focused on is how to love them through it. Like, I have no idea standing before you today, and this is not a political statement whatsoever, but I have no idea what it is like to grow up in a home fatherless where the Bible is not at the center of everything that transpires. Got no idea, because I was fortunate to grow up in that environment. So as a result, I should not pretend to know, other than through God's holy word, what it's going to take to fix someone who does not grow up in that environment. And so Tamar is in a tight spot, a very tight spot. So let's look at her trickery. What she decided to do, verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, dies. So Judah's wife dies. And so Judah takes a little time to get over it, and then somebody's like, man, let's go up to Timnah for the sheep shearing. Now, we still do sheep shearing today for the non-farm public. We call them wool pools, and we don't have any sheep, but there are a lot of sheep in this country, and certainly Australia and New Zealand. This is a day, a wool pool is when they bring all the sheep together and they give them all a haircut, and because they've got a ton of wool laying over here, they get a better price for it, and that's what a wool pool is. That's basically what's taking place here with the sheep shearing. And so Judah goes to Timnah for the sheep shearing, and he probably does not have good intentions, because what we can infer happens at the sheep shearing is that a bunch of crusty old men get together and they have a big time. And you can read between the lines on that. And so Tamar comes about this knowledge. She learns that Judah is going to go to Timnah to shear sheep. And so what does she do? What does she do? She is astute. She is clever. And she's a little bit wicked. She thinks to herself, I got one shot. I got one shot at this. And so what am I going to do? So you can see there what she does. Verse 14, takes off her widow's garments, covers herself with a veil, wraps herself up, sits at the entrance to Anaim, which is on the road to Timnah, and she sees that Shelah was all grown up, because there's a promise in here. Judah promises her, hey, my third son, Shelah, he's too young. He's too young, but as soon as he's of age, he's yours. And you'll get to have a son, and you'll get to carry on the lineage. She's losing hope. Shelah's of age now. Judah is not giving her to him. And so she takes matters into her own hands, so to speak. So she sits at the gate. Her face is covered. And in verse 16, he turned to her at the roadside. Again, there he goes, turning again. Play on words. Turns to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you, for he did not know she was his daughter-in-law, face covered. She said, what will you give me? Let's work this out. We got a business deal here. We're trading horses at this point. What do you give me? He answers, I'll send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, well, you don't happen to have a goat with you, right? Basically, you can see how this conversation is going. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? Because she said, I got to have some kind of pledge. There's no goat here. She replies, I tell you what, give me your signet, your cord, and your staff that is in your hand. Now, in modern terms, that is basically saying, take my Social Security card, take my health card, take my driver's license, take my cell phone. That's what it is. So it's at this point in the story we realize Judah is full of lust because he has lost his ability to think clearly. Because he's offering this lady he doesn't even know because she's disguised. But he's giving her these things, the signet, the cord, and the staff. It's a terrible decision. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived. Then she arose and went away, taking off her veil. She put on the garments of her widowhood. I think this is a great part of the story, and here's why. There are about 6 or 8 people in my life that I cannot say no to. One, of course, is Rachel, my life partner. Like, Rachel is a selfless person, selfless. If she asks for something, it's because we need it. So Rachel, she gets it. If I can provide it, she's going to get it, right? I hate to say this publicly, but my mother-in-law can pretty much get what she wants. Please don't share that. The second service is not recorded, so there'll be no record of this other than all you people. And if you go out and tell it, you're a bunch of hypocrites. But my mother-in-law, my aunts, my Aunt Linda, or Daisy, as she's affectionately referred to, my Aunt Brenda, my Aunt Maxine, my mom's sisters, if they call, I'm going, right? I'm leaving out my sisters-in-law. I did in the first service, and I'd do it all over again. And I'm doing it right now. I can tell them no. It's hard, but through the years I've learned how. And then there's Gracie and Brinley. And Gracie and Brinley are my nieces, and I am their Funkle Braun. That's who I am, Funkle Braun. And we have a good time. One of the greatest days of the year is when we have Funkle's Day, and I go to Sephora. That's my only trip to Sephora all year. And, hey, it's right here. Right? And there's not much here, but what's here, it's theirs. Why do I tell that? Brinley rolls into our house about a month ago. It's kind of a cold night, windy, maybe it rained earlier that day. When she walks in the door, she's like, Uncle Braun, Aunt Ray, do you love me? And that's when you know the con job is about to begin. And I said, of course, Brinley, of course I love you. She said, will you take us to roll yards? Now, I'm in my pajamas with my Dumpster Fire 2020 shirt on, which is significant because it was the COVID year, and I wear it all the time. Now it's got holes in it and all that, and Rachel is beginning to make fun of it. But I said, yes, I absolutely. I put up a little bit of resistance, but I could tell she really wanted Funkle Braun to go. So next thing I know, I'm driving the car on the way to the yard rolling. Now, I used to be a gifted yard roller. This was back in the days when you could go to somebody's home and think, I'm probably not going to get shot. Nowadays, yard rolling's a little different, and now people have all these security cameras, but right out that window right there, I can see Joe and June Yarborough's old house where Micah Rowling and I, with about 30 of our friends, administered a 150-roll yard roll on that house. And he paid us to clean it up the next day. It's got nothing to do with chapter 38. It's just part of the story. Brinley had us talked in, and we went, and we destroyed a yard. I sat in the getaway vehicle because I didn't want to be fingerprinted. But the reason I tell you that story, I shared with Brinley. I said, Brinley, let me tell you the key to yard rolling. She said, what's that? I said, being quiet. Don't ever breathe a soul. Don't breathe it to a soul that you have rolled a yard, because people cannot keep a secret. And it's only a secret until you tell somebody. That's the key. Being quiet about it. This guy that killed an elk on the mountain the other day, or gal, I shouldn't have said guy, we don't know who it was. There's no evidence. He shot it, walked away. Well, look what Tamar does. Look what Tamar does. Tamar dresses herself as a prostitute, gets out of her widow's clothes, goes and sits at the gate of Enaim, and what happens? She gives herself to her father-in-law. She is impregnated. She doesn't know it at the time, but when she's done, what happens? She arose, verse 19, and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. Shh. Not a word. Verse 20, Judah tries to send his friend, the Adullamite, back with the goat to pay the prostitute, and he can't find her. And he even asked the men of the place, where's this cult prostitute? They said, there's not been a cult prostitute here. So he returns to Judah and says, I've not found her. Also, the men of the place said, no cult prostitute's been here. And look at Judah's reply in verse 23, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. So he's worried about his preservation of reputation at this point in time. Never occurs to him, I've given her my driver's license, my health insurance card, my Social Security card, all of these things, my cell phone. Guys, we got to just walk away from this. Oh, but in verse 24, we have what I call the movie line moment. This is the moment in the passage where we're reaching this climax and everything is going to come crashing down. This is the moment in A Few Good Men where Jessup says, you can handle the truth. This is the moment right here, verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah says, oh, this is a classic, isn't it? The back half of verse 24. And Judah says, bring her out and let her be burned. What a great example of righteous indignation. Remember, he still doesn't know. He knows he interacted with a prostitute, but he has no idea who it was. And so I can just see her. I can see Tamar, as desperate as she was, as they're dragging her to burn her in verse 25. She's being brought out. She says, oh, by the way, this is going to be great. Oh, by the way, I have a signet and a cord and a staff from the person who impregnated me. And his jaw, it relaxed. It went straight to the floor, didn't it? He's like, oh my. And so he's at a transitional moment here in verse 26. Judah identifies them and says, what does he say? Probably could have lied his way out of it. I don't know. But this is a transitional moment for Judah as well, because through the rest of Genesis, Judah actually comes into a very prominent place and is still, of course, part of the seed line of Jesus the Messiah. But he says, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah, and he did not know her again. So it's a tough moment for Judah. He has very little self-awareness, and he's not thinking clearly until verse 26, when he's like, golly, I'm busted. I'm busted. She is more righteous than I. And it's almost like his light bulb moment. Well, what are our takeaways from the story of Tamar, as crude as it is? What are our takeaways? Number one, this story highlights God's redemptive work, because from this mess, and this is an absolute mess, there's no other way to describe that accurately, but from this mess comes the continuation of the seed line of the Messiah. We read it right there in Matthew 1, and Tamar's the first woman who's mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. 2, it reveals God's plan of grafting in. Grafting in is my term. All that means is God's ability to take you and I, just like he took Judah and Tamar, and to graft us in to his ultimate plan for our lives. Even if we're not suited for it. Even if you don't have the capability for it, he finds a way to graft us in to his plan. 3, it showcases the importance of women in redemptive history. Now, ladies, if you back up 100 years in this country, you've come a long way. If you back up 200 years, you sure enough have. But if you back up to the Genesis 38, this was a culture where women really had no rights whatsoever. They were designed to carry on the lineage. Women had few choices. And as I've mentioned here several times already, Tamar is in this position of desperation. I don't know, and you don't know what you would have done in this similar circumstance. But here's what you do know. She feels responsible for bearing a child. She doesn't know why necessarily, but she feels responsible. And she is concerned about carrying on the lineage. Maybe, certainly more so than Judah was at the time. Number 4, God is faithful to his purpose. The Bible always points back to the faithfulness of God. 5, he's faithful to us because of love, not your obedience. We are not obedient people. If we're followers of Jesus, we're trying. We're striving to be obedient, but we're not. And certainly if you've never committed your life to Christ, you are completely out of obedience, and that needs to change. 6, he brings life from complex situations. How in the world does chapter 38 of Genesis lead to the lineage and seed line of Jesus Christ? Like that is just an amazing thing to me as I've studied the passage over and over and over again. Why is it this way? It's because my finite mind, certainly, and your finite mind, we cannot grasp that. But here's what we know. He brings life from complex situations. Whatever your life has been, whatever it's been, it's all in the rear view. It's all in the rear view. As far as God is concerned, what he wants your life moving forward. He doesn't want your lukewarm life. He wants you to be a committed follower of Jesus Christ. Here's something I take great encouragement from. If you move to Genesis 49, verses 8 through 12, you'll see that Judah actually gets the blessing of Jacob, even though he's the 4th son. The 3 sons prior to him, they were ruffians. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, all had some big problems. So Judah ends up getting the blessing, and he ends up being the person that's in the seed line along with Tamar. But here's what I draw great comfort in. No matter this world, God's plan is not being threatened. It's not being threatened. And this story is a powerful portrait of redemption. Micah 6:8 is a verse that I go to often in my mind, and I think it's appropriate today. Micah 6:8 says this to us: do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. That is a lesson for us. That is a message for us, to do justice, to love mercy, walk humbly with our God. Not to be critical of our fellow man, but to try to understand, to try to build into them, to try to make them followers of Jesus. How do we do that? We do that by example. We do that by the way we live. We don't do that by running around like Judah, like Tamar, and like those crazy boys of theirs. That's not how it's accomplished. That's not how it's accomplished. As my granny would have said, you got to straighten up and you got to fly right. That's what you've got to do. You've got to walk humbly with our God. Let's pray. Father, we're grateful today for this time together. Lord, this chapter in Genesis brings so much to us, so many things for us to ponder, consider. Lord, I just pray that we'd take these examples of Judah, their sons, Tamar, that we'd learn from them. Lord, understanding that there's nothing here that your plan of redemption could not overcome. And in fact, it did overcome. Through the cross, Lord, overcame all the sin of the world. But Lord, it's not enough for us to just believe in some deity out here. Lord, we must be followers of Jesus Christ with our lives. You must be everything to us, or by definition, you're nothing. So Lord, if there are commitments in this room that need to be made today, I turn them over to you, Father. May this be the day that people within the sound of my voice, Lord, say, I am in a wrong place. I'm in a bad spot. I need a Savior. May this be the day they surrender their life to you. And Lord, I'm grateful for this congregation, and I pray your blessings on it. I'm thankful for your son, Jesus, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.